everyone, and thank you all for joining us on this session about alternate investment avenues. So, talking about investments, what is the first idea that comes to our mind when we think of investments in India? Investors who wants to be 100% safe would say bank FDs, PPF, NSC, Kishan Vikas Patra. Those who can take marginal risk would say mutual funds, and those who have a bit higher risk appetite would say equity and FNO investments. And those who want to take a step ahead would say currencies and commodities. But though all these investments are tried and tested over a period of time, but with changing world scenario, technological upgradation, and changing investors' preferences, these methods have now become traditional in approach and are not enough to back you up at all times. So, don't you think that now's the time to do a little research into what else might be available? Maybe you should seriously consider investing in assets besides stocks and bonds. Maybe there are investments that can generate some passive income that will balance concerns of market fall. That's the reason why we have organized this session for discussing some of the alternative investment options which are unique and uncommon, still gives good returns and are less risky. In order to have a better understanding, we will try to have more of an interactive session, and all the participants are requested to put up their questions in Q&A section of the platform. So before we move on, I'm glad to introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Mr. Apurva Bora, founder of Finolutions LLP, which is a B2B consulting firm providing exceptional services to wealth managers by assisting them in search, scan, and filtration of investment products predominantly in alternative investment space. So when you want to know new ways of investments, believe me, he's just the right person. Next are my fellow team members at MPCS, Mr. Ravi Uttam Chandani and Mr. Malay Daliwala. Mr.
Hello.
Ravi is a SEBI registered RIA and has expertise in financial planning, portfolio management, and wealth management. And Mr. Malay is a chartered accountant and has expertise in international taxation and corporate restructuring. So, starting with the session, Mr. Apurva, to initiate the conversation and before we get into the different investment opportunities, I would like to understand global landscape for investment avenues for the next 20 years.
Thank you, Alpa, and thanks everyone for allowing me to share the views. Alpa, to be honest enough, I don't think I will make a comment for 20 years immediately. I will break 20 years into multiple parts. There are few things which I always quote. Opinions change when facts change. So I can't form an opinion for 20 years immediately. But what in general, what I'm very clear about is that mainstreaming of global investing is already happening now. A lot of investors are not confining to their home bias of investing only in the country that they reside. And on this part, I will spend very little, but I think it's important for everyone to know. When I talk to investors, which I do very little, one thing which people generally talk about is that it's easy to invest into Indian stocks because we understand. We don't want to go global in terms of our investment avenues because it's very difficult market for us to understand how those markets are. No offense to any company, no offense to anything whatsoever, but I keep asking one counter question. How many of us are capable enough to understand the balance sheet of Reliance Industries? Right? Honestly, it's impossible for us to go through those documents because so many companies, so many businesses, are we competent enough to look at the balance sheet and say it's a good company or a bad company? But we make a judgment whether it's a good company or a bad company because today we are on this call. At least I don't know about others, but I'm using Reliance Internet Services for us to be on a call today. We know that these are household names. They are around us. And they're around us so much so that someday they will knock in the door and they will come inside as well, if they've not already come in. So we know that these are easy industries for us to understand, and therefore we can take a call. But then, with the same argument, I also have a counter argument that is Apple an unknown company to us, or is Netflix an unknown company to us, or Amazon, for instance? Amazon actually comes home much often, right? Because we do a lot of buying, of goods using those kind of those options. So where I come from is that we have now become very globalized in terms of our own understanding, and therefore any of those resistance that we may have for us not to go outside of India, I think we need to rethink about it. There are a lot many other things where we need to rethink on this part, but on this particular topic, I would say that one has to look at beyond your boundaries if you really want to diversify meaningfully. And for diversification, I leave a lot of things to Mr. Ravi. But as part of this presentation, we will cover too many things. But to answer your covering question, we are in a scenario where we will have to look at global diversification as part of our portfolio, whether we like it or not, whether we are retail or large investors, whatever that may be. And there is a fitment for every segment into a different or one or the other product. But this is now a mainstream product or a mainstream allocation for an investor to have. I think I've sort of addressed, but yes, your basic question, 20 years, I might not have an immediate view on this, but for 20 years, I will continue to be a global investor as well. That I can tell you, yes.
Okay. So another question that came to me is, how important is volatility factor for global diversification?
Yes, Alba, this is, I think, where the most important reason for someone to diversify globally will come across. And, while everybody is very gung-ho about all developing markets, and particularly an emerging market like India, which is by all means doing good, uh, any developing market or emerging market will always carry the risk of extreme volatilities. This is where developed markets are a lot better because your overall volatility would be far lesser as compared to what you will have in India. Uh, I'm answering this question in two parts because in the later part, I would also want to show a practical slide by showing it as to how this volatility impacts investors. But in general, it is not about the market going up or down that bothers the investor as much. It's the volatility that bothers investors the maximum. And we have seen many times that it is this volatility which affects the purchasing power of an investor. You would have taken a decision to invest into something, keeping in mind that this money at the end of the 5-year period is what will be used to buy this particular stuff. God forbid it, and that 5th year happens to be a year of the correction. It will impact you in a significant fashion. And in this context, there is one slide which if I can share, let me share this part quickly, which will give you an idea how volatility affects investors. Just a sec. Right. Now just look at this. If I look at the long history of last, say, 27 years, not counting 27, this is little backdated data. MSCI India has delivered negative returns for 11 times out of the past 27 years. Right? Bound to happen because there have been few good years, and we all understand that equities will always have ups and downs as part of the journey. It's not how many times you have given negative returns is something which is material. What is material is the next slide. 6 out of these 27 times, the fall has been over 20%. These 6 are the ones which are with those red dots that you will see, where the return fall would have been more than 20% in a year. And the worst is, which is this slide, if you look at the year in which it has delivered you negative returns, the USD equation also has gone negative for you. So your effective purchasing power has got reduced substantially. It is not about the 46% fall in 2008. You top up another 19%, and these are integer values. So you top up another 19% of rupee depreciation that happened in that year. The magnitude of this volatility can be really significant. Right? So the idea of this slide here is just to highlight that the volatility can be really dangerous for an investor.
Sure
Over
is.
to you.
Sure is. Mr. Ravi, as Mr. Apurva helped us understand more about global landscape for investment avenues, what will you suggest to retail investors like us? How should we distribute our wealth and grab maximum benefit of this wave of opportunity?
Thank you so much, Mr. Apurva, for explaining the global importance of global diversification and volatility in such a crux manner. To add on to this thing, see, as all of us, as a retail investor, we have a lot of goals that we have in our mindset, right? Certain goals are maturing in next 5 years, certain goals are expected to be mature in next 20 years. As a retail investor, the biggest mistake that all of us make is putting all of our eggs in one single basket, be it mutual funds or direct equity or FDs or post office or insurance or any product for that matter, right? We tend to make this mistake wherein more than 80 or 90% of our investments are parked in one single asset. Here, what I would like to emphasize upon is, as a retail investor or as an HNI investor, all of us should emphasize on the diversification part, wherein there are a lot of products available in the industry, right? And we should try to ensure that we stay invested across all the products with certain exposure depending upon our risk appetite and our goals, be it in Indian equity markets or US equity markets or Europe equity markets or mutual funds or ETFs or real estate or bonds, insurance, post office, anything. But we should ensure that we are significantly diversified enough so that a volatility or a fall in one specific market does not hamper our other products' returns.
Okay. So, as you rightly mentioned, one should have equity, debt, real estate, and alternative assets in one's portfolio. Obviously, it will vary depending upon individuals'
Obviously.
risk appetite. But real estate by nature has always been a very capital intensive investment. And it is very difficult for a retail investor to invest something in property. So,
True.
do you have any option for our retail investors to invest in a property?
Indeed, yes. In fact, so that's
Okay.
very true, Alpa. That a lot of us tend to make this mistake, wherein when we make certain investments in real estate, the capital size is relatively huge. So because of that, we tend to lose out an opportunity to invest our remaining capital into other assets because real estate doesn't give you that opportunity, right? So recently we have launched a product wherein a retail investor or an HNI investor, they could participate in a investment in the pre-leased properties. They could buy a fraction of that pre-leased properties of a large ticket size and generate rental returns on monthly basis and also gain the advantage of capital appreciation. So this is an area wherein standard return expectation from rental property, if you are investing individually, reduces down to 4, 5, or 6%, and wherein you are investing in a large sized property, wherein you're buying a fraction of that property, your return expectation can indeed increase by another couple of percentages. So that becomes an added advantage along with the capital appreciation opportunity.
So, how is it different from investing in one's own property of this size and the way that you are explaining?
So how exactly does it differ from one's own property is with the same amount of capital. If you are investing in your own property, there are a couple of administrative hassles that you have to go through. Like one, as a property owner, you have to go and look for a tenant. And usually because of the Indian laws, most of the tenants tend to stay for a period of lesser than 1 year, right? So you have to continuously scout for tenants. Then you have to interact with the brokers, which adds up to an additional cost for you. Then you have to go through the government hassle of the property tax and other regulatory expenses that you have to bear. And plus, on top of it, there's a huge risk that you carry of maintenance and getting another lessee. because maintenance adds up huge cost, because most of the tenants who stay for a period of lesser than 1 year or 2 year, then it becomes a little tricky,
Okay.
right? So
So you very well explained the risks associated with one's own property, buying one's own property. But what are the risks that you foresee while investing in the model of fractional ownership of properties that you are talking about?
the risk pertaining to this specific case would be similar to the risks that an individual investor will have by investing in one's own property. So property, there is always a liquidity risk that an individual carries. It might not be possible for you to liquidate your money within a couple of months. So selling a property usually takes a 6 months to 12 months process, and in certain cases it might take even more than that. Then the second risk that you carry is from the perspective of your lessee or a tenant. If the tenant or lessee is not paying you the rentals on time, then that's a risk that you are carrying on your shoulders. These are the two major risks that an individual investor will have towards any real estate form of investment.
Okay. So, usually while in investing property, Malavi, this is a specially question for you. Usually while
Sure.
investing a property, people get tax advantage for reinvesting it in another property, right? But how do you say, what is the tax implication on this fractional ownership of property that Mr. Ravi explained?
So thank you, Alpa. So I think this fractional ownership is quite an interesting subject. So practically, as Ravi Bhai says that if I'm an investor, I want to buy a property, then the same returns I can generate by pooling funds together and getting a fractional ownership of shares. So instead of directly investing in a property, what we do is we invest in shares or other debentures of a SPV, and through the SPV we are getting the fractional ownership of the property. So now coming to the tax implication of such kind of structure, see here what happens is that as an individual investor, if I would have invested in a real estate property directly, then from that property I would have earned some lease rentals, and on the lease rentals we would have paid taxes. Now, instead of this, in case of a fractional ownership of property, what happens is that we invest in the securities, and then through the securities we generate interest income and dividend income. So from the perspective of an investor, I think the tax implications remains the same, but with an added advantage that we will be able to generate better returns as we are pooling funds together and we are striking a better deal with the lessee. Now coming to the tax advantages of investing in a property. So as an investor, when I am investing in a real estate property, so if I'm having some capital gains and if that funds are being invested in a property, I get the tax exemptions under Section 54 of the Act. The same thing is also possible in this case. Suppose today, if I invest in a fractional ownership structure and tomorrow after 3 or 4 years I sell the securities of the SPV and I generate capital gains, then if those funds are invested in some other residential property, I would be able to get the tax breaks. So I think this is quite an interesting structure where from the tax angle, the implications remain the same for the investor, but they are able to generate some better returns because of the pooling of funds together.
Right, right. Thank you for the explanation, Malay. Before we move on, I request all the participants, if you have any questions, do post it on our Q&A section. We would like to address your queries as well. So coming to our next question, Mr. Apurva, while we are talking about investments in real estate properties, is there any way that we could make such an investment outside India?
Well, yes, the answer is yes. There are not many options where those kind of investments happen. So one such option which I may want to highlight here on this forum is something which is in US market with an objective to earn rental yield. But there's a small interesting twist here. See, there are the most often rental yield that we talk about in India would be the residential, commercial, or warehousing. So practically these three things that we talk a lot about. One very important segment in US, which is interesting, is something in the healthcare space. there are buildings which are known as, MOBs is what they call, the medical oriented buildings. These are buildings in vicinity of some large hospitals. Such kind of buildings would typically house about 8 to 10 large size tenants, which are all ancillary services to the healthcare fraternity. Now, one question which I asked to quite a few number of people is that how many people that you know of in the medical line, or doctors in particular that you know of, who would have changed their addresses? The answer is very rarely. You would rarely see your, just think about your family doctor. How many times has he changed his address over the last 10 or 15 years, right? But as a tenant, I would keep changing my residence on and off. Or my office, I would have, there have been several office address changes that I have seen. Doctors rarely change their addresses. So in terms of tenant, they are the stickiest of tenants, if I use that language.
So true.
Now, if in US parlance, if I now go back to US and say that in US, if you own a medical office building, which is comprising of 8 to 10, such tenants, they would not want to move out of that place because there are all vicinities of hospitals that they would want to. Now, because in those markets, your leverage costs are much lower, you can actually put your very little capital, take the additional advantage of the leverage, and enhance your rental yield by a significant margin. There are options like this, and I will do a very quick screen share again for me to just highlight this part. We're talking about one such global real estate company which focuses predominantly in income producing assets in US, with focus only on what is medical commercial buildings or medical office buildings as they call. This is one group which has experience of owning such 20 buildings as on date as we speak. 5 exits already since 2013 or 14 that they've been in existence. There's a significant amount of gross leasable area which they own. 97.6% is already leased. So they buy into already leased buildings. They don't buy the building and then find out the tenants. And all this is for a minimum ticket size of as little as $5,000. I think this is something which fits in quite well for a retail investor to have an exposure to, right? This is one. Second thing which we would say is we have a very strong liking for a product that we talk about, which should have, which should be a regulated product. Here we are talking about is a company which is a listed entity in Seychelles. They have their offices in South Africa as well as US. They are on their way to get NASDAQ listing by 2023. The product in general, if I talk about, targets a return of about 8% per annum for a tenure of 5 years. Investor has a choice to invest in a single property, which again is divided across 8 to 10 tenants, so there is no major risk that you carry for that. Or you can invest in a fund, which will then in turn invest into multiple such properties. So you have two options. If you want to be very conservative, you can actually go and say that you will invest in a fund. Otherwise, the other choice is you invest into a single property, which again is diversified and do the needful. The investment happens in an SPV, which in turn invests into real estate. And in order to get the yield enhancement, it does take leverage. Where the gross IRRs, which is what historically has happened, audited numbers of a listed entity between 11 to 17%. But the distributable IRR you should focus about as, or cash on cash IRRs as we call, would be at about 8%. So then, yes, to answer your question, Alpa, there are products like these which are available in the US. And most often in an Indian context, people would prefer US to be the first choice market because it's the most well-known market, very well regulated market, rather than trying, you have so many options. We've come across investors saying they want to buy a small island property in Greece or Morocco and whatever. But I can't plot Morocco in the world map, so I don't want to talk about those things. Rest of the things are a lot more easy for me to talk about.
Right. That I was going to ask that question, that why we only talk about US when we talk about overseas investment, but you rightly answered that question. So
Yes.
we have a question from our audience,
Right.
Mr. Mitul Patel. The question is for you. So, can you throw some light on the Boggle Hedge principle, global diversified low cost ETF portfolio of Vanguard and iShares, which track world market and real estate index?
So I would prefer to take this answer in the later part because that is already, I mean, the answer is there in the presentation that I have, and I would
Sure.
prefer to show it on screen again as my usual habit is.
Sure,
Then
sure.
I'll possibly answer
We,
that
we
as well.
can we can take it on
Yes.
later. Next question is for Mr. Ravi. Um, Mr. Vivek has asked, what are your views on investing in REITs when compared to investing in traditional real estate investments as informed to us earlier?
So the difference between traditionally real estate projects or an annuity or the fractional ownership project that I explained is traditionally you buy your own property either at an under construction level or at after the construction for different objectives. One is you're getting a leased income, and second is getting the capital appreciation. Right now, if your objective is to generate a leased income and generate an alternative source of income for you, then the best for you is going with the fractional ownership of property and investment into the pre-leased properties. That's something that'll create an alternative source of income for you. And REIT is an investment opportunity for a retail investor wherein they could become a part of a large, good-sized project, and they could invest in the under constructed properties and gain the advantage of capital appreciation.
Right, right. So thank you for that. And while we are still on the real estate topic, Mr. Malay, I would like to ask you what will be the tax implication, when Mr. Apurva talked about investment in real estate outside India. So what would be the tax implication in such states, in such cases? Will it be similar to what is applicable for investments in India? And is there any restrictions in terms of maximum amount that an individual can invest outside India? Mr. Malay? Um, Mr. Malay, if you are not audible.
You're on mute, sir.
Yeah, outside India, two things needs to be considered.
Yeah.
Is it audible now?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. So basically, when we say that we want to invest outside India, then two things needs to be considered. One is the FEMA regulations, and the second is the tax implications. If we talk from the perspective of FEMA, so the exchange control regulations that we have in India, if as an individual I want to invest outside India, then the maximum amount which I can invest is $250,000 per financial year. So how it happens is, suppose we are a family of 4, then as a family we have a total investment limit of $1 million in one financial year. And if we want to increase the amount, then there is even a planning avenue. Say suppose we can invest in the month of March and in the month of April. So basically in a span of 2 months for a family of 4, we can invest around $2 million outside India. So from the perspective of exchange control regulations, under the liberalized remittance scheme, any resident individual can invest around maximum of 250,000 per financial year. Second, coming to the tax implications, so there are two things which are to be considered. Recently, the government introduced a TCS provisions, wherein if an individual is remitting of more than 7 lakh rupees abroad, then the tax TCS would be collected by the bank. But there is nothing to worry about the TCS, because whatever the TCS is being collected by the bank, that would be available as a credit to the individual who is filing his return of income. But yeah, of course, we need to consider this provision while we are remitting funds. When we want, so basically, when you are planning to invest in outside India, we need to consider the TCS implications at the time of deriving our calculations. Secondly, from the income tax perspective, whenever we are investing outside India, so basically as a resident individual, I'm liable to pay tax on my global income. So if I'm investing outside India in the shares of an SPV, which is further investing into real estate, then whatever income I'm generating, so basis the nature of income, I would be liable to pay tax in India. So suppose if that I'm receiving interest on my investment, then it would be chargeable as interest. If I'm selling the shares of the SPV, it will be chargeable in the form of a capital gain. So basically, investing in India or investing outside India, from the perspective of the resident individual, the tax implications will broadly remain the same. But for investing outside India, we just need to be aware of the maximum limit under the liberalized remittance scheme. That is a $250,000 per financial year.
Okay, okay, that's good. So, next question, Mr. Ravi, you have mentioned a lot about passive income till now, but they all seem to be more of a high ticket size of investment. So, do you have any option for a smaller ticket size investment? As we have a lot of retail investors who usually look for passive income, wherein they want to create a replacement income and ensure that they do not have to rely on that primary business for their day to day needs. So, do we have any solutions for such investors?
Yes, definitely, Alpha. In fact, I was expecting a similar question. So
Nice.
we have a product called as P2P lending, wherein an individual can invest money through that platform, and the platform will try to identify the borrowers for us, and they'll try to, according to the risk nature of us, wherein if you want to take a higher risk, it'll be going to more of a credit riskier profiles, and if you want to take a lowest risk, it'll go to the most credit worthy profiles. And the platform will try to do this entire algorithm and will try to identify the best borrowers for us. The platform will have its own research team, they'll have their own credit evaluation team, which will evaluate the credit scores of these borrowers. They'll evaluate their borrowing profiles, etc., etc. They'll try to understand the purpose of borrowing, and it'll try to allocate your entire investment into multiple small ticket sized loans, and then it'll give you a glimpse of, it'll give you a return in the form of equated monthly installments, which is the EMI form, on monthly basis, which will include your principal as well as your interest component. So even you can start that investment with as low as 50,000 and 1 lakh rupees also, which is relatively very low. I think that you're on mute, Alpha. I'm sorry.
Yes. So, I have one question. How is it different from traditional Hundi investments?
So in traditional Hundi investments, the problem is you do not know the credit profile of that borrower. There is no credit evaluation team which certifies this, that okay, yes, this person is credit worthiness, or there is no collateral and such things. On the other hand, P2P lending is regulated by RBI under the guidelines of NBFC P2P guidelines, which they came up with about a couple of years before. So that ensures that there's a governing body which is involved. Which is, you would have heard of CIBIL score, right?
Right, right.
Which is a standard terminology that we use from the perspective of credit score. So similarly, along with CIBIL score, there are a lot of other parameters also which a credit team evaluates while lending money to the borrower. So this platform will have to ensure that they follow all the guidelines before selecting a borrower, and they are governed by RBI guidelines. So that gives you a sense of security as compared to your traditional Hundi investments, because there's no sense of security in that. There's no guarantee. You can, and plus there's also a lot of mafia involved in the other one, and the first one is a complete through a banking
True.
channel. So that
True, true. That is indeed a major difference, which makes your model more rational. Totally makes sense. So let's talk about tax implications. Mr. Malay, as the investors receive a combination of principal and interest back, how is the tax implication calculated on this value for an investor? Does it become too complicated?
So from the perspective of the tax implications, is it audible now?
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. So from the perspective, from an investor perspective, this is quite an interesting model which Ravi Bhai is discussing. So basically, with a small amount of capital, I can be a lender, and I can practically, I'm able to invest in, I can my funds into separate businesses. So now when I receive the EMI back from the P2P lending model, I basically receive a component of a principal and interest combined. So in this case, what happens is, in the contract which I would have signed with the platform, therein I would have been given a proper breakup of what amount would be. So basically, when I'm receiving the EMI back, the principal and the interest component would have been appropriately segregated. So practically, it would not be a complex exercise. As an investor, when I receive my funds back, that would be shown. The interest amount would be separately charged to tax, and the principal amount would be regarded as a repayment of a loan. So instead, this becomes quite more simple as compared to the traditional structure, because here this is the model where RBI is looking after the same. So it is a regulated model, and plus it would be completely driven by online mechanism where, as an investor, I can track where my funds have gone. I would be able to see how the company is performing. I would be able to see that whether the company would be able to service my debt or not. So practically, this would be a simple investment which is regulated, and an investor, I would get complete clarity of how the funds are flowing. So from a tax angle, I would be easily able to segregate my principal and interest, and I have to pay tax on my interest component.
All right. Okay. Makes sense. So, Mr. Apurva, is there any scope for such investment in the overseas market?
So the answer is again is yes. A lot of these things are not only confined to the national boundaries. When you do these kind of trades, and these are like, all kinds of lendings are not necessarily confined only to one jurisdiction called India. So it is just like what you have RBI. There are a lot many other regulators which will have a combined regulated products overseas also. In some of these cases, your ticket size could be a little larger, or it could have a complex cycle, because if you want to diversify your investment or your lending into multiple things, then your timings might be different. So it could be all, all varieties types. But through platforms, and there are digital platforms which are available in international markets, you can have exposure to some of these options very easily. One has to just check who the regulators are and whether that remains a regulated product or not. The rest, all other things are fine.
Right, right. So that makes more sense, especially for investors either residing outside India or planning to settle overseas in future.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So moving ahead from P2P lending, Mr. Ravi, do we have any other product apart from P2P lending wherein our investors can generate an alternative monthly income?
Yes, yes. In fact, so just like the property that fractional ownership of property, there are a lot of other leasing instruments. So whenever a corporate or a big sized hospital or a hotel, they are constructing something, they look to, or even mobility solutions like Ola or Uber, they tend to rely on leased assets rather than owning the asset, because it gives them a boost to grow relatively quicker, right? So all such assets like cars or furnitures or electronic instruments, all these assets can be leased to a corporate, wherein again a similar model wherein an SPV can be created. Retail investors can participate. They could come together and they could invest a small value or a bigger value depending on their investment ticket size, and the entire investment can be used to purchase that asset. And you can also get an advantage of depreciation benefit as well as the interest advantage, and you could lease it to the corporate for a period of anywhere between 2 to 5 years, or in certain cases it could go even higher if the lease asset permits.
Okay. What about capital guarantee? Does an investor get a capital guarantee in this kind of leasing finance model that you suggest?
Yes, because the investment that an investor is doing is linked to a specific asset. An asset will always carry certain amount of residual value. So, and if the lessee is defaulting or anything of that sort, then this specific asset can anytime be sold in the outside market, and an investor can ensure that they get their capital back. So this
Right.
becomes more of a secured investment, and it's relatively more liquidated. Like liquidity is high in this product, and you could do it with a smaller ticket size as well. and your
Right.
yield is normally upwards of 15-18%.
Right, right. Okay. So, coming back about the taxation aspect, Mr. Malay, will this income be treated as part of income from other sources, or will it be considered as a business income?
So this is quite interesting, and so a lot of litigation has been surrounding on this area, but
Okay.
now it is more or less a settled position. So if there is an SPV which has buying the assets and then giving it on lease, then you can regard the same as your business income. So as Ravi Bhai said, that you can also get the depreciation benefit. So then your object of the SPV would be to provide assets on lease to other people, and considering the same as your business, you can pay tax considering the same as a business income, and also the depreciation benefit you will get. So practically, as an investor or in the SPV which is doing this such kind of business, you'll be able to create a very good tax leverage because of the depreciation amount.
All right. Okay. Thanks for the clarity. Mr. Apurva, this was all about creating an alternative income, but a lot of our investors here are looking to grow their wealth and are bored of investing in Indian equity mutual funds market. So, what can we offer them as a diversification strategy to explore investment opportunities in global market?
Well, I'll answer the second part of your question.
Okay.
My first, and I'm not supposed to suggest anything, but my first view would be one should not get bored of mutual funds. That is what I will say in defense of mutual fund to begin with.
Okay.
Many times what is boring could turn out to be really very good in the long run. So if you're
Agree.
bored of a certain part of the portfolio, I'm okay with. The only thing which I say is that for creating wealth, you need to be concentrated into something. For managing wealth, you need to diversify.
Right.
Now, the moment I think about diversification, the first thing that obviously comes is you need to look beyond mutual funds also, because the moment we talk about that, and here I will focus more in terms of investments in alternate options as well as the global diversification. So again, let me very quickly show you something which is a very favorite slide of mine. Uh, every country and every asset class has its own economic season. You need to be well diversified because none of the asset class is going to be a permanently great asset class. Uh, why do people diversify? And I think there are multiple reasons for us to talk about this. I'll come to that. Most often people look at an alternate idea for the purpose of diversification itself. What you want is lower correlation, right? And what category of investors choose alternate investments for what purpose? I think this table will give you that idea. It is not about higher returns. Let me highlight this multiple times. It's about lower correlation to your other asset classes that you need to diversify. You don't invest internationally to earn higher returns necessarily. So this is one thing which is important for us to understand. Uh, Second thing is, what are those options and all? So let me quickly jump to some of the options as to why you should do this. See, I don't want to take a test of people, so I'm straight away giving you an answer. Why do people diversify? If I talk that which are the best markets for someone to invest in, best developed markets and the worst developed markets, and how the correlation has been for the last 20 years, most often people think that it is US which would have done the best over a long period of time. But the answer is it is countries like Australia or Israel which would have done far better. Now, when we look at, and if you are diversified well enough, you will be able to ride through all these things much better. Again, in terms of asset class, and this is again one of my very favorite stuff. People believe that it is the stocks which would have done the best, so US stocks which would have done the best in terms of your returns. But actually, if you look at, in 2013 was the only year where US stocks did the best. The asset class which has done really very well has been real estate, for example. you see maximum purpose as the best one. 5 times it is the real estate which has done very well in the last 20 years. And even better is precious metals. We all believe that gold or precious metals will work only when you are in an economic slump kind of a scenario. But the real data tells you something very different. Right? But also think about it, that could be extremely volatile. So if you look at 2009 and 10, 2 years in a row, your precious metals would have done the best. But then from 11 to 15, 5 years in a row, this was alarmingly bad. So you need to be well diversified is the message. Right? But otherwise, yes, these are options for us to look at. Just give me a second. Okay. So again, coming back to your original question, if suppose somebody is bored with the market, you will have to be diversified and you will have to identify your theme, which gives you your risk-adjusted returns. Check with Mr. Ravi to find out what is that risk-adjusted return for everyone. But you have to be more diversified. That would be my short answer.
Right. So I really don't understand one thing. If these are so lucrative, why are global ETFs or global equities still not famous in 2020, even though all of us are virtually connected 24/7?
So actually, I'll say that ETFs are not popular amongst the retail investors here, but globally ETFs have become extremely popular. So the question of ETF and acceptance of ETF, I think by and large doesn't exist now because that's become a very significant force. Why would someone look at an ETF? Very simple answer. Internationally, it's becoming increasingly difficult to beat the performance of an ETF. So one of the questions which we've got from the audience, and I would want to answer that as well, is that there have been some platforms which offer some very interesting ETF basket. I might not have a view on a single ETF, but if you have 2,000 odd ETFs which are like very very popular, some of them are very clear standout cases. And I will just highlight one screen, which is what we have we have had first-hand experience of dealing with in the last some time, and which has been extraordinary. It turned out to be extraordinary. Not that we knew that this will be so good, but let me highlight one another slide here. A small disclaimer that I need to make: I'm a personal investor in this 5 ETFs. Therefore, I'm highlighting this only. Just imagine this ETFs. These are all products which has an expense ratio which could range from 10 paisa, so 0.1 to 0.35. We are talking about a significantly lower expense ratio in this product. Let me go to the extent saying that would it have made any difference to me if the expense ratio of a product like this would have been 2% or 2.5%? The answer is no. A 2.5% knockout out of an innovation ETF where I've invested in would still be good enough. Can I complain if on a year-to-date basis I have made 134% returns becoming 130? The answer is no. But just think of how do you create an ETF basket. So I'm just taking some time to explain how do you identify ETFs and how do you create a basket of ETF for you to invest in. Mark my words, if you would have invested into ARK Innovation ETF, which has been the best performer on this screen, I don't know what your returns in 2021 could be. This is one ETF where your returns could be at risk because part of the investment would have been, or a good part of the investment in this would have been in Tesla. Great returns on this, and you made your great returns this year. But your dependency is on the performance of those few underlines, which is where the real point will come in. Now, same way, the one which is the worst performer of the lot, right, which is your Vanguard Healthcare ETF, and I'm saying worst performer, 16.42% dollar returns. I shouldn't be cribbing on that also. Now, again, one belief is, and I could be wrong, I am not making any assumptions here. But with the change of power in US, there is one belief that Obamacare will return back to US in some or the other name. The nomenclature would not be Obamacare now, but it would be some other healthcare fund which will be there. in US where healthcare spends will go up. It is also even more important for us to say that the healthcare spends will go up now in 21 after what we have seen in COVID. Chances are this ETF could be defensive, but yet could still yield very, very good returns to an investor. There are some set of people who believe that robotics and AI is the future. You would want to put some money there and say that you would want to take a bet or a calculated bet on that kind of an investor which is there for the future. Similarly, clean energy, with more and more talks about ESG as an investing theme, clean energy ETF of iShare could be one another theme for someone to choose and say that will be another great theme for someone to play. Last but not the least, with COVID, more and more touchless payment mechanisms are going to be there. We all know this. This is where bigger and bigger drive is going to be, and we also believe that in the in the scenario that we are in, fintech is going to replace a good part of the bank's portfolio in the days to come. You might not need a bank account is a reality now. Very recently in India itself, SEBI is coming out with very defined guidelines for fintech firms to create asset management companies. Now, just imagine today you have large mutual funds with large setups that could be replaced with a fintech which could be operating from a business center in Ahmedabad. Right? So you don't need those large. In the good old days, you had large banks which would do all your financial transactions. Today, some of those kind of transactions can be taken care of very easily in a fintech platform or whatever. So what we're trying to say is that ETF as a medium has given huge opportunity for someone to diversify. And this you can do it for as little as $10,000 and create a basket of 5, 3, 15. Your choice, you can pick and choose the ETFs thereafter.
Right. So, another question I would say, there is a growing trend of outbound remittances from India. Is it because India is less attractive, or is it because global markets are more attractive?
So the short answer to that is because we have started understanding the reason or rationale for us to diversify. Earlier, we had a huge suffering of home bias. But now with more and more kids going abroad for further studies, now we've become a little more integrated. Now, let me give another example. Investors have become slightly more broad-based in terms of their thought process. When an investor invests into China, is not understanding a single company in China. Let me bet on this. I can't name top 10 companies of China, right? But you can bet on macro level on an economy which is doing good. And you can take a view and say, I will have a certain percentage of my allocation in a country called Taiwan, in China or a Taiwan or a Vietnam. You can take those kind of bets today much more easily. So first, let me just highlight and say that just look at the kind of remittances that are happening outside of India and how this trend has undergone a change. This is how the graph of remittances have looked like since 2010. Right? You will easily agree that there is a huge surge which we are seeing for those kind of remittances. Let me highlight, this is not remittance, does not necessarily mean only investment. These are all remittances. But the investment graph also has grown almost in the same fashion. So that is one part. India is not less attractive, but the need for investors to diversify outside in other markets has grown significantly. There are certain options which are not available for me to invest in if I want to invest in India. Can I invest in an innovation fund? I mean, with all due respect, India lacks innovation. We boast about Indians in great positions, but Indians are in great positions in overseas markets where R&D happens.
Right.
The reality remains that India still remains very traditional in its approach. We are still not having new age businesses in our listed markets in India. Right? Paytm is yet to be listed. Flipkart is yet to be listed. We're yet to see some of those kind of companies being listed in India. So if you want to participate in some of those growth stories, you have no other choice but to go outside of India. And this is what we say that you need to diversify for.
True, true. Um, so, how important is currency conversions for such investments?
This is actually one of the most important things for investor to understand. It can be double-edged sword. But for the last 10 years, at least if I talk about, this has been a significant difference, in terms of your overall returns. Right? Just let me give you a slide for me to show this very well. Yes. Now, let me give you this one particular example. In this graph, and this is a long graph since 2011 till date. If I look at the orange bar, this is what the Sensex has delivered. So your 100 rupees has become 240 rupees in this period of time, right? S&P in the same period has given 281.59, the same time frame. And these are two in their respective currencies plotted as it is. One thing which is visible in this case is you will see lesser volatility of your S&P. But I'll come to that part a little later. The green line that you see is in rupee terms. What is it that you would have made out of that? So the currency appreciation of dollars would have yielded significantly higher returns for you. Your 100 rupees in Sensex would have been 240. In S&P 500, it would have been 281.59 if currency was not the factor. But if you would have invested in dollar terms, now you convert back into INR, your investment would have been 454.91. This is significant difference. Now, on top of it, the bigger aspect of this is your S&P volatility, or the standard deviation, which is the measurement of your volatility, would have been 16.75, whereas in Sensex, it's almost double, which is 29.27. Again, it coincides with the same thing which I was talking about earlier. It's not about returns alone. It's about the risk or the volatility that you take along with it. If you get higher returns with a lesser volatility, this is what you would vouch for as an investment. And this is why you're going abroad for your investments.
True, true. That brings a lot of clarity. Now, I would like to talk about my favorite subject, startup. Startup is a buzzword for quite some time now. But till date, only venture capitalists, angel investors, or HNIs are only able to invest in startups. I want to know if there are any options for our retail investors also to invest in startups. Mr. Ravi, if you would like to answer.
Yes, Alpa. In fact, there is this recently we have launched a product through which retail investors can participate and invest into a startup with as low as 1 lakh rupees. Now, as a retail investor, one of the major concern that you always have is the security towards your capital, right? As a retail investor, you do not want to lose out on your capital that you are investing. That's something that you would always want to be secure, right? And in a startup, as you know, it's a huge risk that's always. So for to ensure there is a capital security for somebody who is investing in a startup, we have launched a product through which 70% of their 70% of the investment of a retail investor, which they are making into a startup, will be secured and will be mortgaged against a property. So there will be a property which will be underlying, which will be treated as an underlying asset, which will ensure that a retail investor gets more than at least 70% of his value return, even if startup fails and shrinks completely to the ground. So this is, and they can, with the remaining 30% of their investments, they could get an advantage of multi-fold return, which a startup can potentially generate for them.
So this is just like we were expecting. A investment which is good returns but less risky, right? At
Correct.
least 70% is secure.
Correct.
Great. But what about the tax implications on this? Malay, if you would like to share your views on tax
Yeah.
implications on such investment options.
So, from the investor angle, the tax implication again would be quite simple because, as Ravi bhai said, in such kind of product, what we are doing is we shall be investing in the startup, and the investor would be issued securities. So basically, if the investor is receiving, say, equity shares, then tomorrow, if the startup is declaring any dividend, the investor has to pay tax on the dividend. If the investor, if the tomorrow the startup does very good and the investor is selling off the shares, then as a normal investor, the investor has to pay capital gain tax on the investment. And coming to the debt portion, since 70% of my investment would be secured through a property, through a mortgage, so with respect to the debt investment, say a CCD or a NCD, if the investor is receiving any interest on the same, I have to pay tax on the similar manner as a normal interest income. So practically, again, this is quite an innovative product where, from an investor angle, I am getting a secured investment, 70% of which is backed by a property. Secondly, I am able to invest in startups. So we all know the Flipkart stories, like how a small company can grow really big. So I'm able to take that exposure, and from a tax angle, I'm neutral. So this is like this is one of the most innovative product which a retail investor can think of for investing in a startup.
Quite lucrative, right? There's a question from one of our audience. How easy is it to liquidate such investment?
Are we referring to the startup investment?
I guess so. And the question has come.
Yes, yes. So we have created an online platform through which a retail investor will be able to make this investment. So within 4 to 6 months, there will be an option for a retail investor to sell it in the secondary market, and there can potentially be another investor who will be willing to buy that stake from that specific investor. In terms of liquidity, if you'll put it on a scale, it will not be as high as your public equity markets, but it'll be not as low as your private equity market. So it'll be somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
So there'll be a good opportunity available.
Okay, great. I hope that question is answered. There's one question from the audience which is a bit off topic, but Malay bhai, if you would like to take it, if a person is sending more than 7 lakh as studying, then the TCS is refundable. Then is the TCS refundable in income tax?
So basically, the provision says that if I am, suppose if my son is studying abroad, and if I'm taking a loan from a financial institution for funding his education expense, in that case, whenever the financial institution is remitting the funds to the foreign university, a 0.5% TCS would be collected by the financial institution from the remitter. Now I'll get a credit of that TCS collected. So tomorrow, when I'm filing my return, that TCS would be adjusted against my income chargeable to tax. And if there is no income chargeable to tax, then you can also claim a refund of the TCS. So yeah, it is 100% possible to claim a refund of the TCS collected at the time of remitting the funds.
Okay. Okay. We have a question for that startup investment module, Ravi bhai. Is the investment in startup backed by mortgage? Um, is is it a debt portion or an equity portion?
It'll be a combination of both. So 70% investment would be a debt portion, that will be backed by the mortgage, and remaining 30% would be an equity portion.
Okay. Okay.
Potential.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I hope that question is answered. Whether Apurva bhai, whether is it wise to make an investment in Indian market or overseas market?
So the question is not, either or. The the question is you'll have to do both.
Both.
But also it depends on the size and the risk appetite of the investor. So it's not a very easy answer, while it looks a very simple question. The way we look at is that if the investor has any need for diversification, then global diversification does make a lot of sense. Again, keep this in mind. This is not for returns that you're doing. This is something they're doing for a genuine diversification only.
Right.
But
right.
then you should have a product which is supplementing your overall portfolio goal. You don't take the same kind of risk in India as you do, overseas. Then it does not make any major sense. But as long as you're able to manage your, your risk aspect well, then every other thing is fine. So we keep on saying one thing: risk does not look like risk as long as it is giving good returns. Right. So we
Right.
many times, today, for example, now the Indian market is doing well. We feel that entire money should be put into stock markets only. Let's not do, let's not make that kind of a mistake. If you feel this is doing very good, is the time you start looking at alternates and say that's where my next money is going to come from, or next defense is going to come from. This is what you should be doing ideally.
Right. Next question that I've got is, if someone would like to buy equity shares of Facebook or Apple, and he is an Indian resident, will it be possible for him to buy the shares, and how?
It is
if it is possible?
extremely easy to do that. There are online platforms where you just log in and do those kind of trades extremely easily. Account opening process also is easy. You can buy those shares. You can buy select ETFs, which are even much more popular actually if you look at. You can also buy unlisted shares if you want to. So before the IPO of a company, if you want to buy shares of Airbnb or a Robinhood or Ant Financials, which was recently announced and got called off, all those options are available for an Indian investor to invest in.
Okay.
So you get, and all this happens through very seamless fintech platforms, which are very well regulated in multiple jurisdictions. So there is no risk in terms of the regulatory aspect of that, at least.
Okay, so that's really easy. So another question that we have got is Indian ETFs market. What is the future? Any recommendations on low cost Indian ETFs?
Ravi, would you want to take this up?
So I'll back you up, sir.
Okay. So I think one thing which I can easily say is that the future of Indian ETF market is excellent. There is no doubt about it. See, let's understand, more and more maturity that happens in any market will move more from active to passive style. So ETF is a passive style of investing. With greater and greater maturity, you will move towards the ETF, which is bound to happen. Now, where ETFs, and we need to understand where ETFs also can go wrong. Not that every ETF is 100% recipe for success. If I'm buying an ETF of Sensex, I know that I'm into top 30 companies. As and when there is a Sensex constituent change, it will automatically change in my portfolio. So that's very easy. If I buy an ETF which is in small caps and I buy a 50 small cap portfolio within an ETF, I know that I'm in the top 50 ETF, top 50 small cap ideas as decided by the index creator. So that again is also very easy. The complexity comes when somebody says, suppose hypothetically, and those are ETFs which are more prevalent in overseas market than in India, where there is somebody which has created an ETF on turnaround companies. Now that becomes subjective. What will you call as turnaround, right? Or when you when you invest in a healthcare ETF only, and suddenly you've invested at a time when the vaccination news and everything are out, you know that almost all the price rise has happened. And then there could be a lull period, or, with all due respect, government comes back and says that this needs to be a social cause. The healthcare companies should not be profiteering out of this. So there will be a price control on this. The moment this thing happens, your healthcare ETF will suffer a lot, because then there will be a huge correction. Now, an active manager will have an ability to change that at that very moment in a portfolio and say, I will reduce my exposure to healthcare immediately, because healthcare now is being government controlled like fertilizers. That has been happening all this while. All possibilities, I'm talking of futuristic, this can happen. So when selecting ETF, you will again have to create a basket of ETFs. You can't say that this is one ETF which is fits all, right? So if it was that easy, then Mr. Ravi would have had a very easy job, but that's not the case. The point is, this also requires a very careful selection. Entry and exit becomes very important even at that time. But yes, ETF market is going to be a significantly important market, and you can create a basket of low-cost products underlying therein, which is a possibility. At this point of time, is it a debate between active and passive tilting towards what? I am still believing that actively managed portfolios tend to do better. The challenge lies is that if you are managing actively managed portfolio, but you are managing 30,000 crores of money in your fund, then again, you can't change the portfolio constituents very easily. And therefore, it's a very subjective question and a subjective answer. There could be one session of 1 hour on this particular aspect, but to give a short answer, you will have to make a blend of both today in today's scenario.
Right. We have, sorry, Ravi bhai, you were saying something?
Just to add on to what Purva sir said, so in terms of future, there's definitely a huge opportunity for Indian ETF market. But is it replaceable today completely with the mutual funds? I would say still there is a long road to go, because India being a developing economy, there is a lot of active management that plays a crucial role in ensuring that whenever there is any policy change or any economical change that is happening, or any regulation happening in the country, active portfolio managers or fund managers have an opportunity to make the change in your portfolio. So it definitely adds value to diversify in the Indian ETFs, but you should always rely on, at least until the India becomes a developed economy or the ETF market becomes relatively more mature than what it is today, you'll have to rely on a combination of both.
Right. So relating to the same topic, we have one more question from the audience. How good is it to invest in gold ETF?
Gold ETF, so there are both pros and cons to this specific thing. So one is you lose out the risk of your carrying a physical asset, which is definitely better. Second, it's relatively lot more liquidable, because you can just sell it immediately by sitting at the comfort of your home. You do not have to go out outside, right? And third is you also get an opportunity to make an interest income out of that. Mortgaging that is relatively easier. So there are both pros and cons. But again, if you are somebody who is willing to buy a jewelry out of it, then buying a jewelry directly would make more sense rather than buying a gold bar, because you have to incur the the making charges twice. So that does not make sense. So it depends on what exactly you're looking for, and is this purely from the perspective of investment, or you're planning to use this as a asset or an investment diversification perspective, or is it something that you're planning to utilize it somewhere in the future? If it's a utilization, then you definitely need a physical gold, because you cannot wear a gold ETF, right? So, however, if it's from the perspective of asset diversification, gold ETF or gold bonds would definitely.
Thank you. Apurva bhai, in your 30 years of experience, what one common mistake have you seen investors are doing while making an investment?
So I think historically, for all these years, I've seen only one mistake most of the people make. You invest at the time when you feel there is a lot of euphoria. So that's the typical greed and fear cycle, is something which I've seen as the most common mistake most of the investors have made. But I would add one more thing which is less talked about, which is another mistake which a lot of people make. Investors believe that, see, the biggest challenge which mutual funds have is that you have a declared NAV on a day-to-day basis. When I'm managing money of my own, there is no way I can calculate an IRR of my portfolio returns. I will only remember that I bought a stock of an XYZ company at this price and today it has doubled in almost 6 months. But the ones which have not made money, if I make a cumulative stuff and if I want to look at an IRR of my portfolio with a lot of buying and selling in between, it's humanly impossible to do that. Because you invest in a mutual fund or any other managed accounts, it's easy for you to track. And therefore, I many times come across people who are on extremes. One bunch of people who say, I'm a far better manager than most of the fund managers. And I'm not, it's not a debate whether he's right or wrong. The point is that you're making a statement without a qualified data. If you make apple to apple comparisons and then you judge whether you're better off or not, that's one. Second thing is I've seen people spending too much of time on analytics, which is not required. See, I don't have a problem people doing research. Obviously, research is required before you make any investment decisions. But at times we end up going on wrong track of research, which is not going to yield you anything. And hearsay or your source of your data, if it's going to be WhatsApp, better not manage money of your own. That's the only thing I say. So, but the most important thing, to give you clear answer, panic at the time when you should not have panicked. Give your investments time. And one thing which what Mr. Ravi started off, divide your investments into buckets. What is for your short tenure? Invest in short tenure related products. What is for long term? Invest in long tenure related products. A lock-in for 10 years in a product is not bad if your time horizon for investment is 20 years. But if you have son's marriage coming up in 4 years, for God's sake, don't invest in private equity or venture capital. That's the basics. Many times people make those mistakes.
True. Very true, sir.
Very true. So finally, can you please give some general tips to investors, like where to invest and whether to invest directly or through investment managers, through advisory? How much difference does it make?
So I believe that it always makes sense to go via somebody who understands investments far better, right, than trying out something of your own. I wouldn't venture into kitchen and try to make my own dish, because then it would not be something that I can eat. I may do multiple experiments. If I'm ready to do those multiple failures, then someday I will be able to cook myself, for myself. But let's understand this. You have so many investment options around. Rely on someone who has the ability to judge what is good or bad for an individual investor, and then take a call. That's a simple tip that I will give. Second thing is understand your risk profile yourself very well. I've come across people whose risk profile differs depending upon the markets. If in March, if I ask people whether you are an aggressive or a conservative investor, you would say I'm a conservative investor. If today you say that you were a conservative investor, you would have put all your money in fixed deposit. You said, no, I withdrew everything out of FD and put in stock markets in October because the markets were doing very well. Then there is a problem. Define your risk profile, stick to it, and have it strategic for long term. Your risk profile or risk outcome cannot change with the change in the market. Right? So educate yourself at least to this extent, whether you will call yourself as a moderate, conservative, or on the other side, an aggressive investor. Set your rightful expectations out of your returns from the market over a 3 to 5 year period. That's the way to work about. But otherwise, if your portfolio supports, be all over in your portfolio, there is no problem. Be meaningfully diversified. Then everything is good.
Right. We have a question. Can you guide taxation part of ETF TCS applicable, same like buying gold physically, and TDS at the time of gains from it?
So basically, when we are investing overseas in the ETF, so as per the new law, under the when the funds are being remitted under the leveraged remittance scheme, TCS would be applicable at the rate of 5%. So it would not increase the overall cost, but the upfront cost would be increasing. So what happens is, suppose I am remitting 10 lakh rupees for investment in an overseas ETF, then at the time of investment, 50,000 rupees will be collected by the bank as a TCS, which again later on I'll get a credit of the same. But my upfront cost would increase, because if I wanted to invest in exactly 10 lakh rupees, then 50,000 amount would have to be increased. With respect to the TDS thing, so if I'm earning any income, so say I invested in the foreign stock market, and if I earn any capital gain, then it would depend on which jurisdiction you are investing. So suppose I'm investing in the US, then we have to see the US regulation, and in the US regulation, if in that particular product, if there is any withholding provisions are applicable, then considering the domestic provisions and the treaty provision between India and the investee country, the amount of TDS would be determined.
All right. I think we have covered almost all the queries, a lot of queries from the participants. But as we are now running out of time, we shall now conclude this session. And I request all the participants, if any queries are missed out, or if you come across any other queries even later on, do contact us on our email ID. Ravi bhai, if you can share the email ID, we'll be happy to help. And thank you, Mr. Apurva, Mr. Ravi, and Mr. Malay, for the understanding and awareness. I'm sure this session has given a lot of food for thought for our participants to plan a more diversified portfolio. And thank you again, all the participants, for joining us. I think we shall now conclude the session. Have a good day, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alpa, for being the wonderful host today.
Thank you.